Multi-million-dollar laundering networks exposed, a federal official indicted over COVID-era secrecy, violent crime crackdown from Maryland to Georgia, and a major drug trafficking operation dismantled across multiple states. Good evening, I'm Haylee Ficuciello, and this is your Englebrook Independent News Federal Crime Report. We begin tonight in Maryland, where federal authorities are continuing to dismantle a sprawling financial conspiracy tied to more than $20 million in illicit funds. A Washington, D.C. woman has been sentenced for her role in a massive money laundering conspiracy. Lorena Perez Herrera, 29, received 2 years in federal prison followed by 1 year of supervised release after pleading guilty to participating in the scheme. Prosecutors say Herrera directly laundered nearly $1.5 million, part of a broader operation that moved $20 million through shell companies and fraudulent bank accounts. Victims included government agencies, hospital and medical centers, school systems, transportation companies, and nonprofit organizations. 14 defendants were charged, 13 pled guilty, one suspect remains a fugitive. Herrera was ordered to pay more than $1.47 million in restitution. In a separate case, a Portuguese national was sentenced after ramming a federal vehicle during an attempted arrest. Tiago Alexandria Sosa Martins, 30, received time served of 103 days and must pay restitution. Authorities say he drove aggressively into multiple government vehicles while attempting to flee immigration officers during a Christmas Eve traffic stop. A former senior advisor at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease is now facing federal charges. David N. Marines, 78, is accused of concealing federal records and obstructing transparency during the COVID-19 pandemic. Prosecutors allege Marines used personal email accounts to bypass federal record-keeping requirements and avoid Freedom of Information Act disclosures. He is also accused of accepting gifts in exchange for actions tied to his official role. A Maryland man has been sentenced to 13 years in federal prison for a string of armed robberies. Derek Lynn Davis, 36, robbed 6 businesses and terrorized 9 victims in 2023. In one instance, a firearm was discharged near a victim. No fatalities were reported. Next, West Virginia, where federal prosecutors secured one of the longest sentences in regional drug trafficking cases. A Detroit man has been sentenced to more than 22 years in federal prison. Emmett Renard Richardson, 53, led a drug operation distributing methamphetamine and fentanyl across north-central West Virginia. Investigators say Richards was responsible for distributing nearly 2 kilograms of meth and fentanyl throughout the region. 2 men have been sentenced in a connection with a large-scale drug trafficking organization. Michael Corkill, 10 years, and Stephen Alexander, over 15 years. Authorities seized nearly 200 grams of fentanyl and thousands of dollars in cash. In Beckley, Michael Bailey, 37, was sentenced to nearly 2 years in prison after selling methamphetamine to a confidential informant. Now to Virginia, where healthcare fraud, drug diversion, and violent crimes are dominating federal courtrooms. Tri-Area Community Health has agreed to pay more than $513,000 to resolve allegations in improper Medicare billing. A Chesapeake nurse admitted to stealing pain medication from patients. Authorities say she replaced drugs with diluted or fake substances. She faces up to 15 years in prison. A Gloucester man has been sentenced to life in prison for sexually abusing a foreign exchange student and receiving child sexual abuse material. In Tennessee, a Tennessee clinic will pay $300,000 to resolve allegations of improper TRICARE billing practices. A federal grand jury found Andrea Rose, 37, guilty of cyberstalking after sending defamatory material targeting a prosecutor. She faces up to 5 years in prison. Federal agents seized 58 kilograms of cocaine destined for West Tennessee. The traffickers were sentenced to 54 months in prison. A Tennessee man faces multiple federal charges involving child exploitation. If convicted, he faces decades in prison. In North Carolina, a social service employee was sentenced for stealing more than $100,000 in SNAP benefits. And a company agreed to pay nearly $1.2 million after improperly obtaining federal pandemic relief loans. In Mississippi, a convicted felon has pled guilty to possession of a firearm on tribal land. He faces up to 15 years in prison. In Alabama, a Weapon man has been sentenced to 12 years in prison for meth distribution. In Georgia, a man involved in a Buckhead shootout and robbery has been sentenced to over 10 years in prison. Two men pled guilty in a $20 million fraud scheme impersonating professional athletes to secure loans. In Florida, a corporation has been fined over $6.3 million for its role in a legal timber import scheme. And finally, a mother and a son is facing federal charges for exploiting an elderly victim over several years. From financial crimes to violent offenses, federal authorities continue to pursue cases impacting communities across the country. For Englebrook Independent News, I'm Haylee Ficuciello. Good night.